The Kiros Report brings you for the third time one of our greatest thinkers for this tumultuous time. Her name is Dr. Frances Lappé, a recipient of numerous doctoral awards across the globe. She is also the author of 20 books, one of which, Diet for the Planet, sold 2.5 million copies, followed by a series of books that systematically focus on articulating the content and practice of what she calls democracy. The Kiros Report is supported by the Hutchins Center at Harvard University, and I invite my viewers to feast in this great episode, which I am determined to make one of the best, having interviewed my guest about 3 times thus far. This will be her 4th appearance in the Kiros Report, which was previously called African Accent International. Thanks for coming to the Kiros
My
Report.
great pleasure, my delight. Thank you.
So what I thought we should begin with is to talk about, in broad terms, of why you think people are going hungry, in spite of the fact that there seems to be an abundance of food. But as you compellingly argue, it is not the absence of food that is the cause of poverty, the cause of hunger, but something else, which you call the inability that people have to buy food because they are so poor.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, we have enough food in the world to make us all quite chubby, every one of us. So the problem is not lack of food. And that was the beginning of my life's work. Because way back when, more than 50 years ago, when I began, there was a book that came out called The Population Bomb that said that we didn't have enough food. And I said, oh, I want to find out, is that true? And it wasn't true then. It isn't true now. As I say, there's beaucoup de, many, many more calories than we need. So what stands in the way, I came to see, was not that we're just selfish little shoppers, you know, by our nature, but humans are locked into worldviews, what I call filters. That these our assumptions about life create filters, and we really can't see what's outside the filter. And the filter that we learn in the society is that we're just these selfish little shoppers, and we're just, you know, you can't count on anything that's really collaborative. And so you end up in a society, and we're one of the most extreme in the world, where we have such a broken democracy that's able to look out for all of us. So wealth has just rushed to the top. So in this country, 3 billionaires control more wealth than the bottom half of us. And we are among the most unequal in the world, a 120th or so most unequal. And so people just don't have the access to the food they need. And as you know, within the industry, it's more and more and more centralized. So most people aren't within walking distance and, of any kind of healthy food. And that has all sorts of health ramifications. But I've been singing this song for a long time. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, we can't solve any problem, and certainly hunger, without what I call living democracy. Democracy that is us, not them. So. Mm-hmm.
And following that theme, which led you, as you just said, to write a book called Living Democracy, which is quite exciting, which further led you to also write about daring democracy. In these 2 books, in the first book, you argue that democracy is not what most people think, namely a structure of government. Instead, following John Dewey, the great American philosopher, you conceive of democracy as what you call living life.
Yes.
It's something that you need to practice by way of integrating it with your own self, with your own humanity, and then practice it in interaction with other human beings, which then also led you to further articulate three perennial conditions that must be satisfied in order for democracy to be lived in practice, namely dispersion, widespread of power, sharing of power, as you call it. Secondly, transparency, articulating and introducing the people, what is being done and how. And finally, accountability on the part of those who govern. We might want to talk about these three conditions.
Yes, that is, for me, the definition of democracy. I mean, democracy should, and I think to most people, thinks that's a system of decision-making that's answerable, directly accountable to the interest of the people in that country. That is this common sense definition. And as long as we have concentrated wealth that's infecting and warping our decision-making, we have enormous role of private wealth in politics in terms of funding and in just being able to run a campaign. We don't have public financing of campaigns like they had do in many countries. So of course, then the funder is going to expect the person elected to look out for the funder's interest, not the citizen interest. So, for me, it's just so, I think it's just so obvious that we can't solve either hunger or climate change, poverty, you name it, unless we have government responding and actually accountable to all citizens.
Okay. Let's now address the three conditions more broadly. What do you mean by the dispersion of power? How does power get dispersed as opposed to confined in a limited number of people? What are the further conditions that must be satisfied?
Well, key here is who is funding, right? So clearly, as long as we have privately funding of candidates, private funding of candidates, that the people who are contributing and the big donors are going to be, whether they be, Elon Musk of the world, but, that they are going to have, the strongest voice will be those who are paying the most, those who are contributing most to campaigns and to public officials. So it seems like a form of public financing is the only way that we can have a real democracy, and we've had that available in the past, but it didn't last. It wasn't really enough and used and to really make it viable for people to run that way and win. So the key is getting money out and citizens in, and they're that this is just foundational, and we're one of the most extreme examples in the world, as I say, of allowing. We still get caught. We are now down about 54th in the world in terms of the quality of our democracy. So all of our peers in Europe we think of our peers, they're way up in the top 30. So we're already really low, and it's because of the things I'm talking about. And of course, in addition, how easy is it to vote, Is it easy to vote by mail? Is it easy, to get to your polling station? And we don't make that easy in our country. And so, and the age at which one can vote, that's another thing. And in a few countries, they have what some call mandatory, but I think of it as civic duty voting, that it's our civic duty to vote, and it's like a jury duty. You don't complain about serving on a jury. That's a civic duty. And I'd like to think voting is even a more absolutely universal civic duty. And so I believe it's Australia or New Zealand, but they have what they call mandatory voting. So if you don't vote, you have to pay a small fine or something. I'm not sure about the penalty, but it's the expectation that every person of a certain age And then they also have help getting people to the polls if you need help, if you're disabled or don't have a car, or whatever it is. So it's a spirit, if you will. It's just an understanding that democracy is universal voice, and that we are able through public deliberation to think more than just about our own individual well-being, and to understand that we ourselves, it's not just do we make more, say, or we have lower taxes, but if we lower taxes, what is that saying about our whole community, and parks for our kids to play in, and and buses that depend on public transportation. So it's a whole conversation, if you will, where in this country it's so much about individualism versus the public, rather than seeing our full individual fulfillment through the public benefit is a public benefit. It's not just, public transportation is not just doesn't help me get to work, which it does, but everything, it makes it less traffic. We had such a hard time getting here today. Imagine if we didn't have any buses in Boston. So that's, I've just become just so passionate about democracy and trying to think of it not just structure of government and fixing our Senate, our Senate alone is so unfair in the sense of giving, because it's equal representation by area, but it gives people in highly populated, states much less voice. Like California, a person living in California has a tiny fraction of the voice that a person living in a small state like Wyoming has, or, because each get two senators, right? But two representatives representing what is it? How many people live in California? 30 million? I don't know. Versus a few million in another state. That's not equal voice. And then there's the Electoral College, of course, which is not. And there have been 5 times in our history where the popular vote wasn't definitive. So there's just so many things that we can be excited about reforming. And I'm just hoping so much that the young people coming up will just see this is not a given, and with climate crisis is something that's like, dung, 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 we've got to step up, and we're just not doing it. Our greenhouse gas emissions per capita are still among the highest in the world. So we've got to change that.
Some people might call what you're describing capitalist democracy.
As what?
Capitalist democracy.
Capitalist democracy. Democratizing.
Is there a distinction between
capitalist to me is the opposite of democracy. Capitalist means control. Capitalism is defined by control by capital, right?
Correct.
It's not just a market system. You can have a market system where you have the whole democratic entity making decisions about how to set the rules of that market, so it's not just driven by private wealth, by capital. So that's part of the confusion, because capitalism is put in people's minds aligned or just combined with the idea of a free market. But there is no such thing as a free market. Every market has rules. You agree?
Yes.
Every market has rules. What is ours? Do what brings highest return to existing wealth. So wealth goes to the top, rather than what are the rules that will be beneficial to all of us? Rules about limiting climate crisis, right? Rules about access, rules about including, of course, we do have some rules about in food, for example, of keeping out dangerous ingredients for the most part. But we have, we don't have rules about how in a truly democratic economy, not just a capitalist economy, tightly held, we'd have rules that said, oh yes, every community needs to have a grocery store that within walking distance, and that you can actually get fresh food there, and something like, gosh, I wish, like a fifth or more of our people don't have that, don't have that kind of access. Not to mention the extreme poverty, as I say, that they don't have the money to purchase anything. And of course, I've always assumed that if you're really poor and you just have, really tight budget, then it's easy to just grab the potato chips or because per unit they seem cheap.
Correct.
And so I understand that, but oh my gosh, they're ruining our health, The ultra-processed foods are just really devastating our health, and the sweet foods that you can get at a convenience store. We have very high levels of diabetes in this country, for example, and that's from our overconsumption of sugar in part. So it's all woven together about ultimately who makes a decision and in whose interest. And I just am a diehard for living democracy and just breaking through these myths of separating out the economy from the democracy. Because
that's
if we,
excellent.
Yeah.
So what you're in fact asking for is a new kind of democracy.
Yes.
That is what you're trying to alert the public to.
Yes.
That we've been confusing ourselves into reducing democracy into what some people are calling capitalist democracy, the organizing capitalism, the organizing principle of which is profit, money, whereas you're asking for something radically different that would make it possible for people as you say, to have access to food as a right, as a human right.
I mean, come on already. What is more basic than that, We all have to eat. That's a shared human need, and our society should be absolutely organized so to ensure that that fundamental right for shelter, for food, first food, shelter, education, we take that for granted, that people are entitled to free public education. That's feeding our minds, but how can a kid learn if they're hungry, right? It makes no sense. So we've accepted some important public goods like public transportation, and we have to pay, but at least it's reasonable. And so we need to really look around the world and to recognize how out of step we are. There's nobody figured it out perfectly, but other countries have definitely have a greater equity so that we don't have such extreme poverty as we have in the United States, this extreme gap between rich and poor. It's just astonishing to think about, three people controlling half as much wealth as half the bottom. Half the bottom of the population. How could that ever work?
Indeed, and what I like about what you're saying and what you've written about is that the media and its owners are prone to dismiss what you're asking for by way of confusing the public by reducing it into what they call communism. You see how they subvert the poetic articulation of democracy that you're developing, living democracy, daring democracy. They're even linguistically tantalizing.
Right.
They make sense. They make the idea of integrating democratic inclinations with our personalities attractive, precisely because of the power of language. The media, on the other hand, is bound to reduce living democracy, daring democracy, into communism so that human beings would not take the alternative seriously. How are we going to deal with this? This has been going on within the American context, as far as I can remember, for the past 40 years or so. Any time a critique of democracy is articulated, it is dismissed as nothing more than communism. Whereas what you're asking for is really for making democracy a lived life, not merely
Exactly.
descriptions of
It's
structures
an exciting
and functions.
life because we have
exciting
voice.
life.
I
That's
mean,
right.
we didn't evolve to be couch potatoes and, you know, muzzling ourselves. To evolve as a species, we had to be doers. We had to be experimenters. We had to be trying that new food and trying, you know, that new way of organizing our villages. I mean, we've evolved to be doers, not just acceptors and shoppers, right? And so we've got to, I think our education system needs to focus on that idea of educating young people to be continuing learners. You know, I love the term learning rather than educating, because learning is a process that we all are engaged in. Education is often seen as top-down.
Precisely.
So we're all, but it starts in schools with encouraging young people to find their question. Find their question. That's what changed my life, Teodros. You know, when I found my question, I love to tell people I made a C on my first English paper.
Yes.
So I never expected to be a writer of multiple
and a
books,
great
certainly.
one.
But what happened to me, I found my question. I had to know, is it true that we're not enough? My first question, is it true there's not enough food in the world? And when I realized that these big experts at Stanford had it wrong, I said, oh, hey. And I just wrote a couple-page handout, and it became a book, and the rest is history. But the point is that everything is evolving, and we see through these filters, and the filter limiting us now is this idea is that we are a democracy. It's all, you know, we're leading democracy, when it's not, when we are highly compromised democracy, and that we can fix it, and that we have proof from other countries where there's a lot less hunger, and where education is rated much, much higher. So many ways, and so that's why I'm writing this new book called Hidden Hope, because that's the hope.
We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, I'd love to, but it's I don't know, it's what gets me up in the morning is to, you know, not just moan about how far we are back, but to say, oh, I want to learn about what's happening here and there, because if they can do it, I can do it. And then how do I apply that in my own community, you know? How do I make sure that everybody can eat? And that there used to be more of an emphasis locally in the Boston area on community gardens, and we were part of a shared gardening, and I'd love that movement to be revived. So, you know, a place where there was a term for it, where it was a public service that you could sign up and get, you know, a certain amount of fresh food right from your area every week, and we used to go up to the farm and get it. That sort of thing, certainly, but that's fundamental. It's now we're in a real democracy crisis in our country.
Indeed.
And so we have to address that.
And the second condition of living democracy is what you call transparency.
Yes.
How do we make transparency also a way of life?
Well, that's a really important question that the how to solve it, I haven't directly focused on a great deal, but I think first is the challenge today of privately owned media, that most people are getting their news, say from, if you go to Fox News, then you're going to not necessarily hear facts.
I see.
You are exposed to disinformation. And so there are countries, I believe it's New Zealand, where they've tried to counter this with the Public Broadcast Authority, that where you can actually publicly charge a media outlet with false information, with promoting false information, and then this authority looks into it, and if it turns out that if it's both false and harmful, then it has to be changed. And so having some public entity like that would be, for me, part of living democracy. Because we're all on media all the time, but how do we ever know if we're, you know, I mean, I'm sure there are examples of people actually dying from some false information, certainly that, and I was just so impressed that other countries are stepping up to counter it. And we wrote a report that anybody can get on our website at smallplanet.org called Crisis of Trust, where we talked about countries, examples of people who are stepping up for greater transparency and accountability. And I was just so impressed.
Mm. And finally, the third condition of living democracy, which has family resemblance with the second, is what you call accountability. Mm-hmm. Again, how do we make rulers, leaders accountable?
Well, they are accountable to money now. Mm-hmm. So how do we make them accountable?
In living democracy,
I know that. And so the number one starter is to move to public financing of elections. Okay. So that anyone can, with enough, you can get enough signatures, you have to get some baseline of support, you can appear on the ballot, and that you can get some public funding to run a campaign. It seems so obvious to me that if the people are funding elections, then the elected officials will be responsible to us. If money is funding elections, then our elected officials will respond to the money. So I just couldn't be more emphatic about this point. And it's really, I just encourage everybody to read about, you know, what other countries have done in this regard, and how, and to acknowledge, you know, my work now is, I often, you know, the good news is that we're not the best, because if we were the best, that would be shocking. And the fact that we're so low in democracy, ranked so low, means there's so much we can learn. I just want to emphasize that. We can flip it around and make it, oh gosh, there's some place we can go that's better.
And now, this is something that bothers me. How do you explain the fact that Diet for the Planet sold 2.5 million copies, but Living Democracy, Daring Democracy, and these numerous other books that you've written, about 20 of them, did not do as well? We have to have an explanation of this phenomena. Well, it's just staggering.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many factors. I mean,
let's talk about them.
Well, first of all, I think Diet for a Small Planet came out in 1971, and it was really the first book to explain that, oh, we don't need to waste all these resources funneling through livestock. It turns out that worldwide, about 80% of agricultural land goes to livestock that give us 18% of our calories. And so I think it was also good fortune, because I happened to meet the founder of paperback publishing in America. Yes. I was just a kid, and I had no idea. I'd never published anything, but it got into Betty Ballantyne's hands, and she just was so entranced with it that she said, I'm going to make this work. And actually the recipes in it weren't my idea. That was Betty's idea. And Amazing. So I got all my friends to offer recipes, and then I call myself a chemist in the kitchen, because that was when you believe that scientists told us that we had to, in order to get the protein we needed to combine protein in a certain way, in this food with that food, and turns out, no, it's much easier than that. But then I loved, you know, developing these recipes that are still, many of the originals are still in the current edition. But I think it was, you know, why it was just, it was a time when, you know, that was the hippie era. People were questioning authority. Yes. In the 60s, you know, people, there was just back to the land. You remember that expression? Yes. There were communes, and food co-ops were being created, and people, there was just this real interest in eating healthfully and taking charge and empowerment, empowering ourselves, And we're also working together, like in cooperatives, and so I think it just hit at just the right moment. And so I was just a lucky girl.
Incredible. Well, I have a suggestion. My suggestion is the following. Now that you're writing what you told me while we were driving here, that your current book, which I believe is finished.
What?
Hidden Hope.
Hidden Hope. Not, you didn't say finished, right?
No. Is it finished?
Oh,
yet?
no. Far.
Far from it.
Yeah.
Okay. I think you need a chapter there to reflect on the receptivity of Diet for the Planet in 1971 and the appropriate reading public that became attracted to it, and contrast that public, that generation, with the generation that we have now, which under radically different conditions could also become interested in the themes of hope. That the situation, in spite of the apparent reality, is not as hopeless as we think. It's as if what you call hope is there, except that it's hidden. We need to begin, just a suggestion. I would like you to reflect on why Diet for the Planet, which you may think
small
is
planet.
Small planet, you may think is merely a reflection of luck. I think it's much more than that. Not that luck is not the future of our humanity, but it also has something to do with the mood of the generations. And generations develop moods not because we expect them to do so, but because we develop the conditions for them to live the hope. I think this last book could do that. And it could really be a book for our times.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I do acknowledge that, you know, being a child of the 60s, that was the time when we were questioning, and there was a lot of activism on campuses everywhere. So it was a very different time. Today, I feel the biggest obstacle is despair, and the what I call othering, the blame. Donald Trump blamed the immigrants, or you know, people who want greater, you know, representation of all types of people. But
disinformation also.
There's, you know, that we get our. I wrote Diet for a Small Planet before the internet, you know, so that we all read the same newspapers and books, and it was very different. But we can't give up hope. Hope is power. Hope is life. I mean, if you give up hope, you have nothing really. Hope is just the idea that we matter, that things can, even incrementally, maybe not fast as we want, but we can make things better. And hope is not, you know, for wimps, I say, you know, it's because hope requires action. Because if we are not acting according to our values, how can we expect anyone else to, you know? And so hope takes courage. Courage means doing what you thought you could not do. I love reminding all of us that the root of the word courage is cœur, which in French is the heart. So I think do what makes your heart beat faster. Do what makes you nervous, right? And that's courage. So if all of us, you know, as much as possible, every day if possible, either whether it's talking to someone who you don't agree with and trying to engage them and inform them and share with them, or joining some organization you've never been part of, going to a march. Think of all the tens of thousands and thousands of people who came out for a march, not, you know, what, weeks or so ago. A lot of them probably had never been in a public demonstration. And so I love this idea that do one thing every day that scares you. You know who said that?
No.
Eleanor Roosevelt. I
Really?
just love that. Yeah, I used to have a poster, you know, just do one thing every day that scares you. I think that's great advice. Thank you, Eleanor. She was such a hero to me. And then find my other piece of advice, since we're such social creatures, find all you need is one buddy. Maybe it's your beloved partner, maybe it's, you know, a friend down the street or a classmate, but if you have one buddy who says, okay, you know, let's do something that makes our heart beat, let's do something scary, because, you know, it's hard by ourselves, right, just alone. But so I like the buddy system. We change the world through locking arms. And so I think, whoever we are, it seems like it's possible we could find one person who wants to take a risk and find what organization is doing something really in your community. And then I'll just make a plug for our organization, Small Planet Institute, yes, because we have a flyer there, you know, just a really, I think it's called Democracy Bites. These are bites, meaning you can take these steps. And then, of course, our books are there on the website, but they all offer suggestions of organizations you can connect with. And you know, at your church or your neighborhood group or sitting on your bus, talk to the neighbor and say, hey, do you know any organization locally that is really working for something that you believe in? And I don't know, I just think that human beings were not evolved to be couch potatoes, you know? We evolved as doers. And I think our mental health, our physical health is all benefit if our lives have these three ingredients: have power, agency that is, have meaning and connection. Power, meaning, and connection. Beyond, you know, just eating and daylight, we need power, meaning, and connection. And democracy is the only way of life that can guarantee that for each, can offer for everyone that.
Mm-hmm. And I would like to add two more propositions to what you already said. One, I'm sure you're familiar with this quote from Ernest Bloch, who famously said, "Hope is given to us because we are hopeless."
Well, that's not my approach. Hope is not a gift given to us. That we are responsible for making hope. As I say, if we're not doing something, then how can we believe that things are going to change if we're not changing? So I think of hope as power. And sometimes, maybe I don't care, but sometimes I say hope is not for wimps, because, you know, we have to do what Eleanor says, you know, do something every day that scares us. And that's why we need our buddies, because we're social creatures. It's very hard alone to be frightened, you know, doing something new. But if you can find just one buddy, one friend, and say, hey, you know, you're frustrated, I'm frustrated, let's do something together. And I think that's really the approach of living democracy, that it's not just a system of government, it's a way of life that we teach our kids, and we teach, you know, our kids to speak up, right? If they, you know, I hope we're teaching our children, if they see somebody being mean to another person or hurting another person, they have to speak up. You know, you don't just say, oh, you know. I hope we're teaching all of our children that we're responsible for the well-being of all. That's the core idea of, and I think that evolved in village life, that we evolved knowing that, you know, that the well-being depended on all of us. And what is in the Bible? Jesus said, as you do to the least of me, mm-hmm. you know, that you do to me, you know, mm-hmm. that's an expression of our alignment with, in this case, a faith, but that's also just understanding from our village nature, that we understood that we can't have some people, you know, just sick in the tent or in the cave, you know, that and leave them to die. You know, that we're going to be strong as a tribal community by ensuring that everyone can stay away from the tigers and can, you know, we evolved. There's a beautiful book called Mothers and Others, and by Sarah Blaffer Hardy, H-R-D-Y, where she talks about our social nature. I don't know if you've ever heard this before, but that our social nature can in part be rooted back to as mothers in our villages, from the origins in Africa, that we shared nursing of our babies, so that some mothers could go out and gather food, so that then other mothers could stay home and not have to go out that day. And it was the sharing that allowed us to gain the nutrients that allowed us to evolve all of our complex brains. And she's just a superhero of mine, a California writer, Sarah Blaffer Hardy, Mothers and Others. But you know, that we evolved as cooperators, in other words.
And now let me ask you a controversial question for which you are not prepared. If you prefer, you can dodge it.
Oh, no.
I'm becoming very disappointed with the role that women in power are beginning to play. I was listening to this cabinet meeting with Trump, and I couldn't believe what was coming out of the mouth of the Attorney General, who happens to be a woman, who was proposing that those who burn Tesla should be jailed for at least 20 years.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
Which led me to begin thinking about how vacuous certain parts of feminism are becoming now.
Yeah.
Because my hope was that women in power would bring to living democracy what I have called in two of my books, thinking with the human heart, as opposed to calculating with the brain. But this is not what I'm sensing now. I'm disappointed. Are you?
Yes, although we still have so relatively few, the proportions of male and female are still so imbalanced that, you know, I don't think, yes, I'm disappointed, but I don't think we should be discouraged about the goal, because, you know, as long as it's so imbalanced, then maybe people like that feel like they've got to be tougher and they can't, you know, I don't know what they're thinking in this case, but I just can't be discouraged by that, because the more we bring diverse life experience, not just male, female, but people of color, people who are new to this country, the more we have diversity, the more that we can have a living democracy, because everybody will feel heard, everybody will feel represented, and be motivated to work for the common good instead of just defend. So, yeah, that's sad, but I just think we can't be discouraged.
Of course. And now, I don't know how much time we have left, but I would like us to devote it to talk about your new book. I like the title of the book, as I have always liked the titles of all your books.
Thank you.
Living Democracy, Daring Democracy. And now you've come up with Hidden Hope. Linguistically, that is a very explosive term. On the one hand, you're defending hope as an inherent inclination in human beings as human beings, provided that we create a nurturing environment for them to be hopeful and then become doers, to use your term. And now we have added another strategic component, namely that it's hidden.
Yes.
Just because the situation, as Bloch was contending, appears to be hopeless, it doesn't follow that hope is not on the subterranean level. It is still there. It's just hope, and you must create new conditions for it to become apparent.
Exactly. And unfortunately, the news cycle is driven by crisis, right? The news cycle is driven by shock, and bad news is shock, shock. And so that's why if we don't invest in our public our public media, which now we're not, you know, our public radio, public television, we must have media that's not driven by private profit, which is going to look for the shock value, because what we need is the hope value, and we need to be learning from our neighbors, and so we need radio, television that is going to be telling us these stories of where our neighbors are creating solutions, whether, you know, it be in housing or the environment, because they're all out there. You know, we have, you know, so hidden hope is really just based on the idea that that we model ourselves after one another, and there are all these examples of innovations throughout the world that we don't see. They're hidden from us. And so what the book is goes through, you know, a handful of different topic areas or different arenas of life. For example, health, education, democracy, the environment. And it says, okay, where do we rank in the United States? Because they're very credible agencies. And in each of these, it's just, I thought it was bad, but oh my God, we're way down there, like I say in democracy, 54. But in health, for example, we're 35th in health in the world. And so then we say, you know, a few pages on why. And of course, a lot of it has to do with poverty and concentration of, you know, access to food. And then we say, okay, who's number one in the world in that arena? And then we feature what are especially those lessons that we think might be more applicable in the United States. In health, for example, that's this is going to be a while in process, but we've got a lot of that material, and the number one country in the world, or there are two number one countries, different agencies, but we feature Spain.
Incredible.
And it's just, nobody thinks of Spain as a international leader, but it's so simple. They have clinics, 125 clinics in an area the size of Texas.
Wow.
And so everybody, and it's all publicly supported. And they also, you know, just really encourage walking, and we know that walking is really healthy. They encourage fresh food, the Mediterranean diet, so that it's not like here that, you know, you can only get potato chips and stuff that you can walk to. You know, so they try to get stores out where everybody can have access. And another country that is ranked high, two countries, very different, one in Europe, one in Asia, Japan. And I love one of the things they do is the kids in grade school learn to cook. Isn't that
Amazing.
so wonderful?
It's wonderful?
And they take the food to their room, you know, classmates, and they serve them lunch, so that from an early age you don't just think, oh, I'm going to go get a hot dog, which, by the way, is carcinogenic, it causes cancer. They don't think I'm going to do that. They think, oh, wouldn't it be fun to have a friend over and I'm going to make them something? So they teach their children to cook. They have very simple, you have no on-street parking, so it discourages cars, so people walk. They have a lot of public transportation, and so you have, you know, a lot less greenhouse gases that people are breathing, and so it's really healthy. And so these, you know, like the cliche goes, it's not rocket science. You know, we don't have to, you know, make it up. It's just common sense that exercise, access to healthy food, publicly paid health care so everybody can get treated early, and it's all doable. And so hidden hope is that the idea, the best news is that we're not the best. The best news that we have all these stories, all these examples in real life. It's not just, oh, we should, but look at what they're doing, you know. And see, then after the country that is the leading country, we're going to have some short sections on what city or state in the U.S. is doing really, really well, and then tell something local so that people can say, oh yeah, you know, it's not, because often think, oh yeah, well, the Spaniards, the Japanese, they're so different, but we're going to bring it home. How can these very doable solutions be happening in our own communities? And let's go there. So that's called hidden hope.
It's incredible. I wish I had access to Trump or the Kennedy and to read Hidden Hope so that it could guide Trump's public policy.
Right, that would be nice.
Some people actually suggested when your first book was published, I think it was sent to the prevailing president at the time to read the book. I read this in one of the documentaries on the internet.
Wow, I've forgotten that. Wow.
You see, you should be very
cool.
proud.
I'm glad you told me. Yeah.
Maybe Hidden Hope will have that kind of accessibility to the prevailing administration, so that this administration would know what to do. Maybe Dodge needs to spend more time on issues of this kind and use the monies that they are saving to attend to health and educational questions instead of dismantling and destroying them.
True. And the power of the private interest in our system now is so enormous, and what my vision would not allow the billionaires to keep stacking it up to the top.
Precisely.
So it really requires widespread education and not giving up, because I think that's my only fear, you know, that human beings are doers and that we're not couch potatoes, and we wouldn't have gotten to here where we are, as I say. And if in that spirit, we're not saying, oh, blah, 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 you should come out to this event, or you should help, you know, educate your legislator, but we're saying, oh, look, you know, this is exciting, and to feel you have some power. This is not sacrifice. This is strength. This is what we all want, you know, that power, the root of that word is a Latin word, posse, to be able. It just means we all want to be able. Often we think of power as power over, but the root of it is just something, you know, we didn't evolve as just couch potatoes, right? We evolved as doers, and we enjoyed doing, and so that's really the spirit of everything we're writing about in Hidden Hope, is saying, we can do it, we can do it. Look, our fellow creatures around the world are doing this, so we can too, you know? And I believe so much that we model ourselves on each other, so I just can't wait to get this book out.
It's remarkable, and the two concrete examples that you've given about Spain and Japan should also motivate us to use them as standards of what we could become.
Yeah.
That is remarkable.
Right,
Well,
and their longevity is longer than ours too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So now I think what we need to do, take your time, don't be shy. I want you to talk about your research institute, which you found with your lovely daughter, Anna Lappé, in 2001, I think, which
can't
is
believe it.
in Cambridge, Massachusetts, on Elliott Street. Let's talk about the activities of the Research Institute. What goes in there? What do you do?
Well, it's a small institute. We're always looking for volunteers and interns. It's very easy. You just jump off the Harvard T and it's a few feet away. So it's very close, really convenient to get to. Very small staff, small Planet Institute. We're a social benefit organization. We like to call it that and not a nonprofit, because we don't want to define ourselves for what we're not. What we are, a social benefit organization, and primarily, we do, we're working right on books, and then we also have a newsletter, and we have fact sheets. Like please, if you go to smallplanet.org, you can find our current fact sheets relate to what I'm talking about today. Just, that you can just print out and share with a friend about, what's at stake with our democracy today, and some exposing of Trump disinformation. We have a range of them. And so we do both books and fact sheets, and then you can see clips of my talks on the same website. And so you can see all the books, the speeches, and the short pieces. And then we also are in social media. And we just love volunteers. And I think I'm not sure how we use long-distance volunteers, but certainly in the Cambridge area, and it's this really sunny office and cheery office.
I've been there. Very beautiful office.
I'm so fortunate. So it's just so easy to get to, and then we also we're starting up again what we call the Boston Democracy Circle, where we have a gathering, and I make a big pot of stew, veggie stew, and we all talk about what we're doing to create living democracy by, going around the table. And, there are people who are working on voting, and there are people working on money and politics. There are more people like me in the public education. And it kind of died during COVID, and now we're starting it up again. And so that's another feature. But mainly we're a think and do tank. We're not just a think tank, but we're really promote this active solutions. And I just also love to do public talk, so if anybody listening, watching, has an institution where they wanted a public speaker, I'm thrilled to do that. And but I think really, and as I say, volunteers and interns, we always have at least one, probably 2 to 3 in the office, often doing all sorts of research, like on this book, Hidden Hope, and helping us with the website and social media. And so if any of you, would like a cheery place to do something in the solutions direction, please contact us.
Remarkable. Well, this has been your host, Teodros Kiros, for the Kiros Report. I hope my viewers enjoyed this feast for the imagination to the degree that I did. The Kiros Report is now in Patreon. Please become subscribers if you can, and try to watch our program and share it with human beings all over the world so that they can extract and act based on their hidden hope. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.